It's an interview with Mike Goldstein. Mike, can I ask you, first of all, here you were in the Sea Organisation, cruising the world on a battered old ship with Hubbard. What on earth did you think you were doing?
Thought we were saving the planet. Basically, the whole organization of Scientology, the whole idea was to clear the planet, you know. And the ship, where Hubbard was, always was the place where everything was controlled from. So when on the ship, you really felt like you were at the top of the ladder. You were in the upper echelon of upper echelons working with him. And you were there, and everything that you did meant so much because it had this effect on everybody else, and then all over the planet. So that was the feeling that you were at the top.
Tell me about Hubbard's need to control and to know about everything.
Well, I don't know so much that it was a need. Maybe it was. I just know that he did, which was obvious from a lot of the writings, that he was an expert, or felt he was an expert on everything, or had to be, or something. Because, I mean, you can read through issues that he wrote, policies that he wrote, and he even had how to wash a car. You know, the specific way of, or how to wash a window using newspaper and water, which is fine, but this is the way you had to do it. And the idea for the people, the followers, the people around, if he wrote something, this is the way it was. And he wrote something on practically everything, you know. And so the person was in such a position where he thought he knew something about everything and was the expert on it, and the people around him bought into this.
The messengers on board, what did they do for Hubbard, and how were they regarded by the rest of the crew?
Well, the messengers were basically an extension of him. In other words, they were an extension of his communication. He could send these people out around the ship to gather information for him and ask questions, so that when he was doing evaluations of things that were going on, and also to follow out commands of his. So they were basically recognized around the ship as an extension of him. And they were trained in such a way that they had to learn to really portray and communicate not only his words exactly, but his intention. So when you got a message from a messenger, it was like you were getting it from him. They were just a via for him, really.
What did they do for him? Describe them. What did they do for him?
Well, like I said, they would go around the ship gathering information. If he would say he was doing some evaluation on some area somewhere, and he would send them to the person that was working in that area to ask them specific questions. And if he needed something, that's what he would do. That was their initial responsibility, was just gathering information around the ship and communicating his intention.
What did they actually do for Hubbard, the messengers? What were they like?
Well, they took care of a lot of his personal needs, got things for him like cigarettes and ashtrays, and followed him around the ship when he did different things, and got, you know, sort of like gophers, glorified gophers. And they also, like, their main thing, like I mentioned, was that they were an extension of his communication. So when somebody saw them on the ship or they came up to them, it was like you were talking to him. That's the way it was set up. They really had... that was their personality, or had to be, that they were directly communicating his intention, his words, asking questions. And most of the messengers, all of them were young girls, 13, 14, 15. I don't know why. It just was that way. There was one young teenage boy that was among the messengers too when I was there. But other than that, those were the messengers, mainly young girls.
So if you'd done something wrong and you were in the doghouse, you might get a 13-year-old come up and bawl at you like Hubbard, is that right?
Well, but it wouldn't be her. You knew that. It was him.
Can you just describe how that would happen, but you knew it was him?
Well, it was just understood that the messengers, when they came to you, that was him. That was him talking. They were just a via for his communication. It wasn't them personally. Okay? In fact, I remember a scenario once when he was wanting to find out, he was asking me, sending a messenger to ask me a question regarding photography, which had nothing to do with the current post I was on. It was sort of a PR thing by him to because he was preparing me to go into this public relations office, which I wasn't even ready to do yet. I was busy handling finances and other things. So it was kind of strange, but he sent a messenger down and asked me the definition of photography, which I had no clue. I didn't know anything about photography. It had nothing to do with what I was doing. And at the time, it was just completely a non sequitur question. So, and I was very, very busy at the time, so I just sort of blew her off, even though this was supposed to be an extension of him. And I just said, I don't know, photography, taking pictures, and leave me alone type of a thing. And then she would come back from him and say, flunk, Commodore says, flunk, try again. And I'd say, well, okay, taking beautiful pictures, okay, aesthetic pictures. And I'd get on with what I was doing and shoo her away. And she'd come down, and after 2 or 3 times of this, you know, you could see in her eyes that she was kind of not, I could see her there going, kind of, not just him, kind of going, come on, you better answer this. And so finally I was able to, I said, look, what does he really want? What is it? And I somehow was able to coax the answer out of her, which is something they're not supposed to do. And then later, he cornered me up on the prom deck and said, what do you mean getting my messengers to give you the answers to questions that I asked you? It was kind of joking, that kind of a thing. And we had a pretty good rapport together, but they weren't supposed to do that sort of thing.
Okay. Right, Mike, on the money side, tell me about your appointment and what that enabled you to do for Hubbard financially.
Well, it was a rather strange circumstance. He had just done an evaluation of the financial matters, basically regarding the flagship and ties from organizations and so on. And he rearranged the whole finance network at the time. And in this evaluation, the first target on it, which was pointed out to me by someone else, I didn't even have time to look at it, I was so busy, was that he used to have targets on his evaluations for people, and this one was appointing me as a finance dictator. Okay? And at the time, there was nothing else said about it. It just was that's all there was the first target on his program was appoint Mike Goldstein as FBO dictator, finance banking officer dictator, and then the target was assigned to him, and it said done, and that was it. No information, didn't have anything to do with the rest of the evaluation. It was just right out there, and nobody seemed to know what it was. So the best thing I could do was I looked up the word dictator in the dictionary, which was to appoint somebody in time of emergency with complete power. So I figured, okay, that's what I got, and I just did it. I just ran with it, and basically I just used that to bring money from the different organizations, because there were around the world, to the flagship. You have to understand that there were all sorts of checks and balances set up throughout the organizations of different people working from different perspectives. Like you had the Guardian's Office Finance trying to keep money in reserves, and you had the finance banking officers trying to send money to the flagship. And somehow that balance got some money to the ship and kept money in reserves. But the Guardian's office was always the top dog. They always really said where it would go. Okay? In other words, a man by the name of Herbie Parkhouse, who ran the finances worldwide. So by having this, and there was always this battle going on between the finance banking officers and the Guardian's office finance, and it was the way Hubbard set it up as a check and balance. But they always had the top billing. And so by having this appointment of dictator, I was able to bypass for the first time the power they had, and I could go to the finance banking officers and get them to send the money. And so that was really the main issue, was getting the money sent there. And in terms of figures, it probably went from about 40,000 to over 100,000.
So just picking up on the money thing, Mike, was money important to Hubbard?
Well, money was more, it wasn't important as a lot of people would think, in terms of him wanting to go out and buy cars or be extravagant, because he wasn't like that. Money was only important to him really as a reflection of the production that was going on. It statusized and reflected the actual production that was going on in the organizations. Also, it was something that he felt that the world recognized you if you had money, and so therefore it gave you a good positioning as far as recognition, as far as he was concerned, and it was more the power. involved. So it was more that than just the actual money. He didn't really, and why I say that it was important in terms of reflection of production is that when I was handling finances for him once, and I also used to handle the bank accounts and the reserves and that sort of thing, I figured out a way how to trade, for instance, dollars and Swiss francs and so on, and make money on the exchange rates and increase my actual statistics and actual money by trading dollars for Swiss francs or something. And I was very proud of this. I thought it was pretty good. He didn't really care for it at all. His point of view was, you're like a banker or something. That's not what we're here to do. In other words, it didn't really reflect any production. It was just making money. And so that to me demonstrated that he really wasn't interested in the money itself, but it is a reflection of production.
Have you any idea of how much money he actually got from the organization?
Well, I don't know. I know that most of his money came from royalties that he made on the books and tapes and that sort of thing, and other royalties that he had from other books that were still in publication. That's where most of his money came from, not from the Scientology organization. I think I paid him somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 and some a week. And that was it. And other than that, the only other money I know he got was actually bonuses that I initiated at the time just because I wanted to do it. But he never asked for it.
Tell me, Mike, about your difference of view. It's really the point where you became disillusioned in what he was up to, as to whether or not you should be milking the existing people for more money or getting more people to clear.
Well, it was a point that I was in more disagreement with. And at the time, I wasn't in my own mental condition to really lay my cards on the table. It just confused me. And what that was that he had appointed me after the Dictator post. He put me in a post of what was called LRH, L. Ron Hubbard, Properties Chief, which was in charge of the marketing of his properties. In other words, everything that all the books and tapes and everything that he had copyrighted or written, and marketing of that, a position that he had held himself and turned over to me. And in fact, and it sounded very exciting. It was something that nobody had ever done before, and he wanted me to do this. And he had given me an hour-long write-up, actually on a tape, of ideas and things that I should do in terms of this particular position. And mostly on there, 99% of the things on that tape did not have anything to do with getting people into Scientology and up the bridge. Now you understand that part of our whole purpose was supposed to be clearing a planet. Okay, this was what we were supposedly involved with, was getting people up this bridge of services and clearing them and making all this a better place and this sort of thing. So it would seem that the top marketing position on the whole planet in Scientology would be involved with that. Yet 90-some% of his ideas on this tape were not how to do that, but how to get existing people that were already on, doing the services to buy more services. And I couldn't reconcile this in my own mind. And so I instead of, and maybe if I had been able to go and just sit down and talk to him about it, or say, this is baloney, this is what you should do, I don't know what would have happened, but I didn't. And I actually ended up kind of doing my own programs that were more in that vein than what he had. And that got me into trouble with people that were still over me, but under him.
Doesn't that actually tell you something about Hubbard, that it was all part of his game? Everyone was participating in his game, and he wanted to milk them.
Well, maybe, I don't know. Just in this thing, I didn't agree with him. The thing was, though, is he did have one thing on that tape that wasn't like that, and that's the thing that excited me the most. But the majority of it was this. I can't tell you why. It's like I knew him from many different faces, many different ways. Okay, this is just one thing that I was in high disagreement with.
I'm just talking now about Quentin. You knew Quentin.
Yeah.
A bit. Just tell me what he was like and how Hubbard reacted to him.
Well, Quentin really was a real sweet kid. He was a real nice guy and very soft-spoken. And I think it was very difficult for him in the position that he was in, being Hubbard's son, and Hubbard kind of put him there as this top technical person, this auditor and case supervisor. And I never felt that Quentin really liked this position. I think he just wanted to be a teenager. I think he was interested in being a pilot in planes, and he had models of them up. And I think it was very tough on him in that position. And I always kind of felt sorry for him.
He was gay, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And how did Hubbard react to all that?
Well, I don't know how Hubbard reacted to him personally about it, but there was a lot of things written in Scientology that being gay was aberrated. If you were gay, there was something wrong with you. So I knew people, actually there were several people that were gay on the ship that had suppressed it. Okay, in other words, it was not okay to be gay. There was something wrong with you.
Mike, can I just ask you more about Quentin? Why did he end up on the RPF?
Well, the scuttlebutt was that he took pills when we were in Portugal or something, tried to commit suicide. And that's why he was put in the RPF. Because a lot of people, if you messed up at that time, it was the popular thing to go to the RPF, where you could be rehabilitated. So since other people were going, I guess Hubbard decided to send his son. And I don't think his wife was very pleased about that, but he went. And the only reason I can think why Quentin would try to do something like that was because of the position he was in. It was very difficult for him being Hubbard's son and being put on in this very high position, and I don't think he was that interested in it. He just wanted to be a pilot, and also the fact that he was gay, and that's a very tough thing in Scientology, to be gay, because especially that kid, to be Hubbard's son and to be this top technical person and be gay, that would be a horrible thing to be wrestling with and suppressing all the time. So maybe that's why he tried to do it.
What did it entail for him being on the RPF, or for anybody else? You were on the RPF
He was-
yourself.
yeah,
on the
it-
ship. What happened? Where did you go on the ship? What happened to you?
Well, ship wasn't that big of a place, but you basically you either slept if you were higher up in the RPF, you got to sleep in the men's dorm, which was not a great place anyway. And I mean, you had 3 bunks right together, this far apart to squeeze people in there. But that, before I ever went in the RPF, I always had a cabin, my own cabin. But in the RPF, if you were an executive in the RPF, you got to sleep in this horrible place, the men's dorm, that smelled like dirty socks and all this sort of thing. But a lot of the people just slept down in the lower hold, either on the deck or in hammocks. And so it was, and all you were wearing was, you were assigned 2 black boiler suits. You could wear clothes underneath it, but that's what you wore, as well as a dirty gray rag around your arm to identify that you were in liability, okay, in a lower condition. So, and nobody else on the ship could talk to you and that sort of thing. So it wasn't the greatest place to be. It was like being on a chain gang sort of thing.
How did the real world that you encountered at ports react to you all? How hostile did it get? I'm thinking about the Rock Festival. Well,
prior to that, it's what's interesting is that you kind of have to understand that it was really different on the ship. In the ship, as far as the existence of the ship and what it was, nobody in the Scientology world could know where the ship was. And the ship was set up not as a Scientology vessel, but as a management vessel. So in the ports that we were in, nobody could know that we were Scientology. In fact, it was a real crime to go on shore wearing any insignia or carrying anything like that. In other words, as far as they knew, we were a management vessel doing this management. And Hubbard did all these PR things on shore, the musical troupe, and going to hospitals and doing all this, trying to gain confidence of people and a good public relations. Well, the funny thing about it was, most ports got along fine until this situation in Portugal in, 1974. And at this time, people came to the ship, and these were local people that were riled up by somebody throwing rocks, stoning the ship. People got hurt. And in my estimation of what happened there is the thing they were screaming, these people were screaming was CIA. Well, if you really look at it, I think the people in these ports, or the people, maybe it was even the officials there that got people riled up. I know there were certain political things going on at the time, but the way I look at it is that we were putting out something that we weren't. And they were not stupid. There were people in those ports that knew we weren't who we said we were. They probably wouldn't even have cared if we were Scientology. But they knew we weren't who we said we were. And here were a lot of Americans on a ship doing all these strange things. So they probably figured, oh, it must be the CIA. And the reason they stoned the ship was because they probably thought we were the CIA. Which I thought was very ironic, for him to do all these PR things in the ports and not let people know we were Scientologists, and then we get stoned because they think we're the CIA. I thought it was kind of funny.
But if he wanted to clear the planet, why didn't he let people know you were Scientologists?
I'm not sure. Probably because he was paranoid that things would happen. They would have problems or something. I don't know. And partly he didn't want anybody to know where he was, or where the ship was. So if it wasn't connected with that, it would never get back to, say, newspapers and people in other areas. That was all very, very confidential.
Okay, moving on now to the move into Florida. What was his idea behind the move to Florida? How did he hope to make more money out of that?
Well, when we were on the ship, we used to have, once in a while, there would be somebody that came. It would have to, you got to understand, it was very, very confidential. And there was a lot of concern about how the people coming there, if they weren't, security risks and so on. And I remember there were certain people that were allowed to come to the ship to do services and pay for them, big bucks. And I only remember 2 when I was there that actually came, that were not staff for training or not Sea Org members, but public, and they were both mission holders that had enough money to come there and pay for services. And when we went to when the ship first went to left the Portugal after the rock festival, I think the idea was to set up somewhere. And I think he got the idea that there are certain services that if he could set it up not to be delivered any place but at Flag under this special condition, you could charge what you want. You could make it a place where people would come for the technical perfection. You could get all the big high rollers. You get the people with the dollars, and you could make a fortune. In other words, cream all the top off of all the organizations, the people with the big money, get them there to do services that weren't allowed to be delivered anywhere else in a way that they weren't allowed to be delivered. So I think he tried this originally before they moved into Clearwater. I think they were at Daytona Beach. It was still a confidential location, and the people were sworn to secrecy that came, the public. But when he saw that they were making a lot of money, the idea was, well, let's do it. Let's set it up. And I was down there at one time, and I believe the income for a week, this is like in 1970, 78, 79, was somewhere as at $500,000 a week. I mean, that's where the big bucks started to be made, when you could do that. And they're probably making much more than that down there now.
Now, just thinking about Hubbard himself, what did you actually make of him?
Well, I liked the guy. I personally liked him. I considered that we were friends. I didn't really think of him as some sort of a god, and know that he knew all. I mean, I liked the guy. I worked with him, and I had a kind of an interesting rapport. He would confide in me about things and ask me for suggestions. And it was kind of a different relationship that he and I had. And I personally liked the guy. I considered him a friend. In other words, things get blown out of proportion. I mean, you read the books about him. I mean, in the church of Scientology, he's like a god. He could do no wrong. This is the source of this is the way he's portrayed and thought of in there. This is where it's at. I mean, he is the source of everything. Well, yeah, he was the source of Scientology, and he was a brilliant creator of games. I mean, he could get people to join in and play this thing. He was pretty good at it. And sure, he was the source of Scientology, but that's about it. But then when people would leave the church, or other people that would get involved with what was going on, then they would portray him as a lunatic, as a crazy person. So you'd see books come out like, Ron Hubbard, Messiah or Madman. See, it had to be one or the other. Well, he wasn't either, or he wasn't really either. He was just a man who did what he did, and he did some things that were pretty good, and he did some things that were pretty crazy. That's the way I viewed him. If you have a friend, how do you've had friends where they do some crazy things, and they're a little bit crazy, but they're still your friend. So you don't think of it that way. It says, okay.
Did he have unusual powers? Did you ever have instances where you thought that was pretty weird?
Yeah, I did. I spent a lot of time with him where we would talk in a different way. There were several times that I would find myself in a position where he would come up to me and we would start talking, and then all of a sudden it was like I wasn't there anymore. I wasn't this 23-year-old Mike Goldstein anymore. It was like I was somewhere else, and we were having this conversation, and he was actually asking me all this advice. And the weird thing was I was actually giving him answers, and I seemed to know things, and it was rather bizarre. And there were times where I could remember just kind of pulling out of it, and there was like two of me. There was this 23-year-old kid, and then there was this other person that actually had this rapport with him and was advising him and this sort of thing. And once I even pulled myself out of it and saw two of the people there, two of the executives that worked with him, kind of up against the wall like this, kind of like in a stasis situation. And I just, at the time, just thought this is rather strange. And after a while, I just didn't think about it anymore. It wasn't that it was uncomfortable. It's just something that happened. And I don't really know what happened or how it happened that way. But that it was a strange situation. Another thing about him, I think Hubbard's biggest mistake that he made, I think that he really, in part of him, he generally was interested in helping people. I think he had to get over his own ego. That's what got in the way. His own ego from doing that. And an idea that, in all fairness, was not his problem, but it's just his problem, but you see it all in the whole field of mental health and self-improvement and everything, which is where the person puts themselves on a pedestal as some sort of a guru and thinks they know how it is for others. And I think that's the biggest lie there is, that you don't know how it is for anybody else. You got to ask them. They know how it is, but you don't. And this is where what I believe his biggest mistake that started right from the beginning and wound up all the problems that he had personally and with the organization, and how all the things came out and took what was meant to be a good thing, and there were some good things about it, but the things that became real troublesome was because of the idea that he or somebody knows how it is for you, and they don't know that.